Okay, election. This is my first YouTube video since the election. I was just really busy. I was really busy with my day job. I was really busy making TikToks and Instagrams and talking to you all in DMs. God, the amount of DMs, the amount of interest in this US election, I have never seen it before. You know, even in Australia, I was putting up videos and hundreds of people were sending me DMs about what they thought. You know, they said that more people in their offices were watching the US election than the Melbourne Cup the day before. It truly is an election that has really captured the entire world. And I think, because of Donald Trump, and he's just such a polarizing character, although maybe not so polarizing, seeing as he won in a complete whitewash. And B, I think it really is a symptom of everyone across the world just being so sick and tired of this woke mind virus that has taken over seemingly everyone over the last few years. Truly, since about 2008, which is where I kind of timestamp where woke really began, which was the advent of Facebook. Social media was really ramping up. And then since then, over the last kind of 8 to 10 years, it has just exploded. And I think it really reached its pinnacle kind of pre-COVID, and then in the couple of years into COVID, when there was just so much control over everyone. Honestly, people felt like they couldn't even talk, couldn't have an opinion without being completely shut down. And that truly was the case. And thankfully, over the last couple of years, it really has dwindled down. And I think COVID is to blame for that, because people have looked back and they've said, hang on, we were fed so many lies during that period. We were literally barricaded inside our homes, forced to take vaccines, do all of these things told to us by the experts. Yet now, with hindsight, when we look back at it, they were all complete bullshit, essentially. And with that realization, I think a lot of people have been like, hang on. So if all the COVID stuff was wrong, then what else that these people in charge have been feeding us is wrong also. And believe me, it's a lot. You know, we put these people in charge thinking that they are somehow smarter, more experienced, more capable than the rest of us, and that's why we vote them in. But it's just not true, especially with so many people being corrupted by all these big organizations like Pfizer, like all of the pharmaceutical brands, and also the climate armies, the pro-Palestine people. There are just all these causes that people have hopped on the bandwagon of, and are really profiting off, but it's not for the people. And people have now opened their eyes to that, and that's why we're getting things like this landslide Trump victory. And thankfully, off the back of that, people are now questioning everything. Like, we're kind of saying, like, well, do we really have to respect people's pronouns? Do we really have to be scared of how we talk about awkward issues like abortion, like vaccines, like climate change, like the war in Gaza? You know, so many people have differing opinions on all of these things, but in the past, over the past few years, people have been way too scared, you know, only on one side to talk about their opinion. That's why the other side has gotten all the airtime, and it makes everyone think that side is the correct and factual side, when it's just not true. And I think Donald Trump really empowered everyone to say, fuck it. We don't believe in this woke mind virus. We are not drinking what they're giving us. And we are now going to say it because he says it. He doesn't care what people think of him. He's the ultimate just have confidence in what you believe in, have the courage of your convictions, and just say what you think and have an opinion, and don't be scared of the consequences. And seeing that on display on the world stage when he was doing all his rallies, when he was doing all of his podcast interviews, you know, he was so genuinely himself, and that funneled down to his team as well. You see JD Vance, he's the same. He is so genuinely himself, unapologetically. And it's really inspired, I think, so many people to do the same. And we are now seeing literal hundreds of millions of people in the US saying, we're not subscribing to this anymore. We are not being censored. We're not going to worry about what we're saying and worry that, naming someone a he might offend them if they identify with a she. We are not doing all of this anymore. We are unsubscribing from it. And we will be respectful and we'll be kind and loving and we'll have an open dialogue. But we're not going to tiptoe around these issues anymore because differences of opinion exist. And in the past, they were celebrated and they were debated vigorously. Over the past few years, they've tried to silence that. But now, thankfully, it's coming back out the other side. And hopefully this just continues to the rest of the world. I truly think it will. I know that we've got an election coming up in Australia over the next few months, probably early next year. And I truly think that this is going to funnel through. Because, they've just pushed it way too far. Like, things were getting absolutely ridiculous. Thank God for someone like Donald Trump had to almost die to bring the pendulum back to normalcy, to center. Now, if that doesn't show that we're in dire need of some common sense around the place, nothing does. Now, I don't want to talk about the numbers and the specifics of the election. I think we've done that to death and everyone's seen that on the news. I want to talk about what I've seen on social media since, and especially over the last couple of days, and my kind of personal experiences with it. Because the screaming banshees of the left are still having an absolute meltdown. Even, influencers here in Australia, and very publicly on TikTok and Instagram, I have kind of called out Abbie Chatfield because she has been having an absolute mental breakdown over the past few days. She just cannot handle the outcome of the election. And instead of kind of looking inward and being self-reflective and accepting the outcome and saying, hang on, if so many people have turned against the Democrats and turned against this, I guess, woke thinking, then what are we doing wrong? Maybe we should have a look at why our message isn't getting through. This was really well articulated by a Democrat strategist on TV. Take a look.
I'm going to speak some hard truths to my friends in the Democratic Party. This is not Joe Biden's fault. It's not Kamala Harris's fault. It's not Barack Obama's fault. It is the fault of the Democratic Party in not knowing how to communicate effectively to voters. We are not the party of common sense, which is what the message that voters sent to us. For a number of reasons. We don't know how to speak to voters. When we address Latino, and language has meaning. When we address Latino voters as Latinx, for instance, because that's the politically correct thing to do. It makes them think that we don't even live on the same planet as they do. When we are too afraid to say that, hey, college kids, if you're trashing a campus at Columbia University because you're unhappy about some sort of policy and you're taking over a university, and you're trashing it and preventing other students from learning, that is unacceptable. But we're so worried about alienating one or another cohort in our coalition that we don't know what to say when normal people look at that and say, wait a second, I send my kids to college so they can learn, not so that they can burn buildings and trash lawns, right? And so on and so forth. When we put pronouns after names and say she, her, as opposed to saying, you know what, if I call you by the wrong pronoun, call me out, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. But stop with the virtue signaling and just speak to people like they're normal. There's nothing I'm going to say to Michael that I'm not going to say to you, that I'm not going to say to somebody else. I speak the same language to everybody. But that's not what Democrats do. We constantly try to parse out different ways of speaking to different cohorts because our focus groups or our polling shows that so-and-so appeals to such and such. That's not how normal people think. It's not common sense. And we need to start being the party of common sense again.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, if you don't admit where you failed, you can never learn from it. And this is just going to keep happening over and over again. And it's why so many people hate this extreme left ideology, because they aren't open to communication. They aren't open to having a dialogue where both sides grow. They want to live in an echo chamber where their views are just validated. They don't want to hear about facts. They don't want to hear if they've said something wrong, if there's another side to the story, people's personal experiences. They don't want to hear any of that. They only want to hear it if it validates and confirms what they think, feel, and say. And that is the worst possible way that you can go about life, because you never grow. You know, the very reason they lost this election was because they thought everyone in America had abortion as their number one issue. And surprise, surprise, it wasn't. But they can't admit that. They can't grapple with the fact that most people would rather grocery bills come down than women be allowed to have an abortion at 9 months. This is the level of, I don't know, is it idiocy? Is it ignorance? It's something, but they are so unwilling to get out into the real world. They're so wrapped up in their own cotton wool and their own issues that they don't actually see what adult problems are in the real world. They are so privileged that they can have abortion and trans rights issues and LGBTQIA plus issues and pronouns as their number one on their hierarchy of needs. But let me tell you, that is not accurate for 99% of the country. And refusing to believe that is just going to get them further and further away from where they want to be, from being in power. And it really does track because, you know, they say that this young generation have the most narcissists ever. And it's true. You know, when you're a narcissist, you are so obsessed with your own self-importance and your own issues that only have relevance in your life. You don't have any empathy to step out into the real world and appreciate what other people are going through and the hardships they're going through. You know, God forbid someone votes for a president who is promising to lower their mortgage rate, to lower taxes, to lower their grocery bills at the end of every month. Why would you not vote for that? Especially if you're in middle America, if you're earning a very average wage, if you have been struggling the last 4 years post-COVID when everything was screwed up, and you've lost all hope and all trust in the government after what they did during that time, as if you would vote for this one issue of abortion that probably has never even affected you over all of that stuff, literally your entire livelihood. But they can't seem to get that through their thick heads. And of course, it's always these influencers and celebrities who are in LA, they're in New York, they're in the most prestigious and privileged part of the country, and they don't have to deal with things like mortgage stress or grocery stress. They always have food on their plate. They can always go out to an expensive restaurant and have a beautiful meal. That's why they care about abortion. All of that survival stuff on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs is taken care of. So it just goes further and further down, and then you get abortion, these social issues at the bottom, and they're like, oh, this is something that we can be angry about. But that is not representative of the large majority of the country, and they need to go out there and go and talk to normal everyday people, normal everyday families who have been screwed over by this past administration. And as long as they keep refusing to do that, as long as they keep existing in their own echo chamber, then they're never going to be in power. And I actually think maybe the actual politicians in the Democrats have started to see this. You know, you saw the concession speech of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, and they were quite humble. They weren't blaming. They didn't play the blame game. They said that we've lost, we've accepted it, and we need to do better. It's these influencers and these celebrities who've refused to have some self-reflection. And that's to their peril. Now, Abbie Chatfield, who is an Australian influencer, she has made a name for herself because she was on The Bachelor or something, and now she hosts some reality TV shows, claims to be very politically aware and very well educated, yet gets pretty much everything she says wrong. I don't care if she goes on her platform and starts talking about politics incorrectly. You know, whatever. It's a free country, do whatever you want. I feel bad for her followers, who are usually quite young girls. They're in a vulnerable position. They don't read the news themselves, so they don't know the actual facts. They don't go and do their own research. They don't listen to differing points of view, and that's fine. You know, they may not be very politically aware or interested, but they follow her for her other pursuits, for her fashion, for her podcast, for her relationship advice. And then she's coming on here after the election and having an absolute mental breakdown. I quite literally think she's bipolar and she's having a manic episode because of the carnage that is going on in her stories and on her Instagram feed. And they're just accepting what she's saying. For instance, throughout the entire day of the election, she was right up until the final minutes saying Kamala's going to win, Kamala's going to win. She's saying that Texas was going blue when it was clearly going red. Like, her own biases were taking over everything, and it's because she's so emotional. Again, I know people are emotional. Not everyone can be a fact-driven journalist, but to spread this literal misinformation and disinformation is just wrong. And I mean, I think in the end it's going to bite her because she's just going to reveal how much of a fool she is. You know, you can only say the wrong things and the wrong facts so many times before people catch on. But then in the days after, she's now had this complete conniption. She keeps posting that men now have control over women's bodies because a couple of incels have obviously gotten really annoyed at her and are now kind of trolling her and saying, we now have control over your body. Now, she knows that that's not the case. She knows that Trump would never enact an abortion ban. He can't do that. The president doesn't have the capabilities and the powers to do that because, hey, they live in a democracy over there, just like us. Issues like abortion have always been under the jurisdiction of states. That is literally in the Constitution. And she doesn't seem to understand that. She thinks Donald Trump is going to come in and be this dictator where it's literally the opposite. He is actually taking power away from himself, and he is saying this is a state issue. We want the people of each state to vote for this issue, which is what it has always been. He's simply going back to what the forefathers of the USA wanted and set out in the Constitution. For some reason, in her head, that has translated to Donald Trump is taking over women's bodies. He's clearly said that he will never enact an abortion ban. He's said that he's not in favor of it. The only abortion he is not in favor of is late-term abortion, which I think is pretty universal. I mean, why would you want to kill a baby in its 7th, 8th, or 9th month? I think most people would agree with that. But of course, she doesn't look at any of these facts. All she looks at is that random incel angry man who probably lives in his mother's basement, sending a message to her, trolling her, saying, we now control your body. And she's taken that and run with it as fact. And that is so irresponsible because her young fans now think that they don't have control over their bodies anymore. And what's worse, kids in Australia are saying that this is going to happen here, that there's going to be a trickle-down effect because whatever happens in the US happens here, which, again, is not true. I mean, we have our own abortion laws, which fall under state jurisdiction as well. So I don't know what her problem is. And I think she knows all of this, but she's doing it for rage bait. I mean, or she's having a legitimate mental breakdown. But I think she knows all of it. I think there have been too many people who've told her that Donald Trump doesn't have control over this, and I think she kind of gets it, but she's too far gone now. She has to just run with it. And then the weirdest part, which I just found just crazy, and I made a TikTok about this because I was so dumbfounded, was that she's now blaming people like Joe Rogan and saying, if your partner listens to Joe Rogan and you're a woman, then you need to divorce him or break up with him immediately. I mean, what the fuck is that? Joe Rogan is a centrist. He has said many times that he's politically homeless. He was on the side of Bernie Sanders in the last election. She has clearly seen a 30-second clip on TikTok of him maybe talking about guns or something, or saying that men shouldn't be able to use women's locker rooms, and has run with it and said that he's misogynistic and homophobic and hates women. No, listen to more than a 30-second clip. This is why she's so bad at doing her job. She needs to actually research. And if she did, she would know that Joe Rogan is not the problem here. Why would you tell a whole bunch of people, millions and millions of people, that if their partner listens to Joe Rogan, then they need to divorce him or break up with him, or else they're the problem as well? You've just alienated heaps, hundreds, thousands, millions of women. Like, these off-the-cuff comments that have absolutely no basis are just so, they're detrimental to her own brand, but they're also harmful. I mean, people love their partners, and that's an extremely offensive comment. Joe Rogan has people on his podcast from all walks of life, all races, all religions. He literally speaks to people from every single side. Once again, she doesn't know that because she doesn't actually listen. And regardless of any of that, who are you, Abbie Chatfield, to tell any of us what we can and can't listen to, who we can and can't be with based on their podcast preferences? Like, this is ludicrous. You're trying to fight for bodily autonomy, yet you're trying to tell other women who they can marry or who they can be with in a relationship with. Do you not see the irony here? You want to control everyone, but you don't want to be controlled by anyone. It's the same with this vaccine stuff that she was pushing during COVID. She had the same mental breakdown during that time. She was on her stories, oh my God, like 200 stories a day, saying, if you question this, you're a bad person, you deserve not to be in this country. Really hateful rhetoric that was dividing people. All of these people claim to be so kind and loving and accepting of diversity. No, you're not. You're only accepting of diversity when it's your people, when people agree with what you're saying. And when the diversity is within your tiny little box of what you consider to be okay. Now, who put you in the position of power to dictate what that box is? To dictate when we draw the boundaries of what is okay and what's not okay? Why would I listen to some woman who's preaching to me when I can see that over half the population in the US, many of them being women because there were more women registered to vote than men in this election, voted the opposite way of what someone like Abbie Chatfield is saying? Go with the numbers. Just because they're not screaming on their social media doesn't make their view any less influential or any less valid. I think we all need to realize that this squeaky wheel thing, everyone's over it. I think these people are truly a lost cause. I wouldn't even try and get them to listen because they just don't. They don't in any part of their lives. So they're not going to start now with Donald Trump. So we kind of just need to let them be and they can continue living in their own deluded worlds. Like, I don't care. I don't care what they think anymore. And that has been the biggest relief of this election. We don't have to care anymore. We don't have to care about offending people in these minorities. And I think that is a really freeing and liberating thought.